Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Decouple podcast, where we explore the science and technologies that can decouple human well-being from its ecological impacts, and the politics that can make decoupling possible.
A quick message before we get started. My name is Dylan, and I'm helping your host, Dr. Chris Kiefer, with a number of exciting projects to expand the podcast. Right now, we're working on a YouTube channel to have video interviews, transcripts for every episode, improvements to the website, and eventually, there will be ways for you to get involved yourself. Decouple will always be ad-free, so if you enjoy the show, please consider donating. You can find a link to our Patreon in the show notes and on the website, decouplepodcast.org. Thank you so much, and enjoy the episode.
Welcome back to Decouple. Today, I'm joined by Francois Morin. He is the China director of the World Nuclear Association, and just going through his resume has a list of qualifications and accolades that is just too long for me to summarize. But one interesting point I noted was that, Francois, you were once the Cultural and Science Attaché in Leningrad, USSR.
Yes, that's it.
So welcome to Decouple. It's a pleasure to have you. Today we're going to be deep diving the history, the present, the future of nuclear in China. But before we get started, I didn't get a chance to go deep into your introduction, and I always love to get more of a sort of human, personal introduction. So, tell us something about yourself as if you were striking up a conversation with an interested young person at a dinner party.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I am very pleased to participate to your our conversation today. My background is I am from France first, and I studied engineering, physics, mathematics, a little bit of biology in France. And I was mainly interested by nuclear physics and by biophysics too. I made some research and research report interesting in the laboratory in the French Atomic Energy Commission under the supervision of Professor Francois who was a Nobel Prize in medicine. And I made some research in the molecular transfer in membranes using radioactive elements. So it's why it was within the French Atomic Energy Commission. But then I had several activities, including what you mentioned, at scientific attaché in USSR. And then when I came back to France, even though it was right after Chernobyl, I started working in a French company, Framatome, in the design department, and making research on how to implement modification, update after Chernobyl on French power plants. So I was considering the large accident, the long-term consequences of large accidents, typically what happened in Chernobyl and Fukushima. But then after a few years, I left for other activities, and among them, I can quote my time in nuclear medicine. I went back to the French Atomic Energy Commission, and I worked a few years in nuclear medicine equipment. So this gave me the opportunity at that time already to go to China and Asian countries and to implement technology transfer with Chinese industry. So this is to say that I have been knowing China for a long time. And even when I was a student, I had chosen at that time Chinese language as an option together with Russian.
I was just going to ask, because on your resume, you speak Chinese, Russian, French, Japanese, English, not Japanese, Mandarin.
Spanish,
and when did you learn Mandarin? Was that, you said in your studies much younger in life, or was that,
yes,
was that later in life?
No, I started at university, and
so
at the same time.
What drew you to do that? I mean, it's a pretty major intellectual investment to learn Chinese.
Yes, it was.
And I think you kind of interpreted what was coming in the future, I think, in terms of the rise of China. But I mean, this was in the 70s that you were studying China?
Yes, in the 80s, in the early 80s, and I studied Chinese and Russian at the same time. And it's true that between my relatives or people I knew, some were commenting that, but are you communist? Because it was the only common point between these two languages, because they have no roots in common anyhow. So, are you communist to explain it through logic? And I said no, but these two countries are the future. Yes, it was my guess at that time.
Wow. Okay, you were ahead of your time, I think. So.
No, in our university, we were at that time we were 300 person. It's nearly the same now. Among the 300, we were 18 studying Russian and 5 studying Chinese.
Wow.
And I was the only one studying both.
Wow.
But now they may have 50 people studying Chinese.
Right. Okay, I mean, Francois, I want to explain sort of my motivations for bringing you on the podcast. I'm Canadian, and I've done a number of profiles of nuclear energy around the world. But China's been a very tough nut to crack. I've really been wanting to explore nuclear in countries in the global south and in the newly developed countries like China. But it's very hard to find an expert to speak with. And my motivation for particularly wanting to understand China better is, nuclear in Europe certainly is in crisis. I think there's a real sense that things are on the retreat in the West, where a lot of these technologies kind of had their roots. And as someone who sees a lot of promise in nuclear, particularly around issues of not just climate, but other environmental concerns, China seems to be maybe alongside Russia as one of these, maybe these countries of the future, or kind of bastions of hope where positive things are happening. And I mean, you're from France, which I think is also very interesting. I did have Myrto Tripathi on to talk about the history of nuclear in France and some of the implications for French society. But in my naivete, perhaps, I look at China and I think, is China arriving at the stage for a kind of nuclear power breakout in the way that France did at the beginning of the Messmer plan? So I'm very interested in sort of exploring those themes with you. And again, this is a very naive assumption. The more you study, the more you realize how complex the situation is. So
no, but you're right. You're right, Chris. In fact, quite often in Western countries, we are keen to consider that a nuclear plant, what is nuclear plant, is a big gold thing, making water boiling and taking energy out of this boiling water. And in China, yes, it has not the same image, definitely. The nuclear plant itself has not the same image for many reasons. One of them is that China is developing, it's still a developing country. Even if you go to Shanghai and Beijing, you see amazing progress and a level of life which has nothing to envy to our Western cities. But still, it is, in a whole, it's still a developing country. And the technological things are appreciated. People see a kind of wonder in that. It was the goal of the Communist Party in China to make people convinced only by science somehow.
And there's this concept I've heard of like, maybe it was more than a century, but kind of a century of like domination and embarrassment and shame, like when the West dominated China, gunboat diplomacy, the Opium Wars, and this sense, I think, in China that, hey, as a country, we led the world. We were the most developed country in the world. We were the center of science.
But you go too far. I mean, the attitude, the Chinese attitude towards nuclear energy is not defined by a nationalistic approach. They don't want to take any revenge. The first reason why they have nuclear industry is that they want to have all kinds of technology. And nuclear is one of them. They are not ashamed of buying technologies from abroad. It's what happened with the nuclear industry when they started the building of Daya Bay NPP in the southern China near Hong Kong in 1994. In fact, they had to import everything including concrete itself. Yes.
Wow.
And now it is true. Now they are approximately, they have, for the latest Hualong reactor, they have 88% of local production.
Wow.
So they are still importing 12%. So you can consider that, yes, they wanted to get from 0 to 100%. But if you look on the other side, you can say that they were not ashamed of buying from outside. And it's still the case. So they love what is technological, be it Chinese or not.
And that stands in, I think, sharp contrast to the West, where, I mean, there's a huge amount of sort of science and technology illiteracy. There's, a real embrace of the precautionary principle. I think we're just seeing the situation with the AstraZeneca vaccine in Europe, where there's this, in my opinion, massively overblown response, which is not understanding the relative risks of COVID and this vaccine, which, again, statistically, I think 17 million people have been vaccinated, and the rate of thrombosis is lower than, in a control group. But this is also reflected in, Europe's fear of, genetic engineering, and I think to a large degree their fear of nuclear as well. So there's a real sort of attitudinal difference, between, I think, developing countries in general, where there's a more positive attitude towards technology, and in the West, where we feel, for a variety of cultural reasons, that technology is somehow not the answer, that we need to atone for our sins by sort of regressing or abandoning certain technologies.
There is also in China an obvious advantage or superiority even of nuclear of other kind of plants, be they gas plant or dams, or when you go to a nuclear plant, everything is very clear, very clean. The atmosphere is clear, the grass is very green, flowers grow, and it's very clean. And this feeling you don't have that when you go to a big cemetery factory, or if you go to a steel company. You don't have this feeling of cleanliness. And the nuclear plant is very clean. So you don't have to convince people that nuclear power, for instance, is a good tool to fight pollution.
Right.
You don't have to explain it. It's visible.
Yeah. So I wanted to kind of go a little bit back into the past, because I think, again, one of my naive assumptions about nuclear in China is, okay, hey, you've got this, highly centralized state. If they choose to do something, they're going to do it in a, with central planning in a very structured way. And perhaps nuclear lends itself to a certain degree of planning within the economy. Certainly in the example of France, a highly technocratic state that was able to, standardize design and, build out very efficiently. And I kind of assumed that would be what the history of nuclear in China would be before looking into it whatsoever. And I read a great book by Zhu Yi Chong. It's called The Politics of Nuclear Energy in China. And it really goes through the history of this kind of buffet lunch of different reactor designs that were tried. And it's I think China has, I'm not sure if it's more designs and different kinds of designs than any other country in the world, but I think it's around 7 or 8 turnkey foreign reactor designs, as well as their indigenous designs. So that was very interesting to me. But going even farther into the past, before the mainland China was a nuclear power, I heard this really funny story, and I think it was a gathering of nuclear weapon states in the 1970s. And they also had a section where they were talking about, as Atoms for Peace was in the 50s or whatever, but they were talking in the 70s, and they were inviting countries that had weapons, but also nuclear energy to talk. And of course, at that time, China only had the bomb. They didn't have nuclear energy, but it was maybe a diplomatic snub, but they were invited to speak, and they were sort of confused for a second, and they said, "Oh no, because Taiwan has nuclear energy." And I think the way that they told the story, it was sort of like, I don't know that this was really the motivation for them pursuing nuclear energy in the first place, but kind of this moment of shame at not having developed this. But China in the 70s was a very interesting place. I mean, in the midst of the Cultural Revolution, after a recent famine under Mao, and I think in the 60s with the Great Leap Forward, and a country, it's extraordinary that this country that was, so agrarian, so poor, maybe with these islands of a small amount of development in the form of the cities in this sea of underdevelopment, that they were able to actually make the bomb is crazy.
Yes, this is very crazy.
And from that as a starting point, such an undeveloped country pursuing nuclear energy, I mean, the challenges were enormous. So can you walk us through it just so we can situate ourselves in the present, how nuclear energy rolled out in China, how it began and what sort of forms it took?
Yes, first there is a different thing, two different things here. You have the government, you mentioned the central government taking a centralized decision. This, of course, played a role for developing the nuclear bomb in the early 60s, definitely. But it's not what is important here for the development of nuclear power. Mm-hmm. Why? Because China became a little bit different. I mean, the Chinese government, after Mr. Deng Xiaoping started his rule, and he made the new China, we can say.
And this is just for listeners who are not familiar with China, Deng Xiaoping, it was a rejection of kind of the isolationism of Mao and this idea of opening up the economy, liberalizing
the opening
things.
up of the economy.
Okay,
and he started in Shenzhen in 78 when he went down there for making his first speeches. Shenzhen was a village with fishermen. Mm-hmm. And now it's a city of 8 million people, and it's as modern as Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was 1 hour, half an hour train from Hong Kong, and it's as important, as big, as significant, as rich as Hong Kong. And he was right. So he started this differentiation between. He created these free zones, some free trade zones. Right. He opened 7 of them around China. And I mean, he created this confidence in the diversity. And the Chinese government today is not ruling everything from the center, saying, oh, you must do this, go this direction. It's not exactly true. The Chinese government is somehow, I would say, to make it short, managing diversity.
And that's also because, I mean, I think for outsiders to understand how large China is, how populous it is. I mean, one province is like, I think Germany is a similar population to Guangdong province. I mean, it's governing one, how many is it now? I forget, 1 point something billion people centrally is I guess just an impossibility.
Yes, it's why when we look, for instance, at the nuclear role in the Chinese electricity mix, we look at China in a whole. So we say, oh, nuclear is only 5% of the mix. So it looks very small. But when you take the provinces where nuclear is active, exists, it's all along the coast, the East Coast. The provinces have 50 million, 60 million, 100 million inhabitants. And there, the nuclear share in the mix is already 25, 23, 18%. So it's if you look at China as a whole, one country, so you will never grasp the idea of the roles of not only nuclear energy but any kind of other industry. You're right. We should look province per province.
Yeah. So something that was interesting, again, because I want to build up some understanding of the history a little bit. And I guess China's gone through some drastic changes, right? From being a country that was really starved of foreign reserves, foreign exchange, to now a country with massive surpluses, right? But in those early days, developing a nuclear energy program, as you were saying, having to, import a lot of the technology, that costs a lot of money, right? And it doesn't cost Chinese, what is it, the yuan? Is it the yuan in China, or am I off on the currency there? But it costs, it costs US dollars, or I guess francs at the time, or pounds.
To be honest, Chris, to be honest, sorry, yes, to interrupt you. To be honest, Chinese development in the 90s and until 2010 nearly was mainly due to foreign investment.
Yeah, and so the first,
be honest,
I understand.
And when you look at the when you compare foreign investment in China to foreign investment in India,
Yeah.
it explains, I mean, not it explains that, not fully, but partly it explains the difference between the two countries. Because the foreign investment, direct investment in China was during 20 years, 10 times every year what it was in India.
Wow. Wow. So one of the stories that I heard is that in order to sort of the rationale, I think, for building one of the first big plants, I think maybe Daya Bay, which is right across from Hong Kong, was to sell the power to Hong Kong and to be paid in foreign exchange to help build up reserves, you know, I guess just in general for the Chinese economy. So that was interesting. But then, you know, later on, I think in sort of the early 2000s, when there was sort of a trade imbalance, and I think the US and the EU were starting to raise concerns about this trade imbalance that was developing. I understand that some of the reasons that China sort of ate a buffet lunch of different designs was kind of under pressure to buy large things from the EU and from the US to address that trade imbalance. So, okay, fine, we'll buy EPR, we'll buy AP1000 from you guys, you know, $5 billion project or something. And that was a way to sort of, like, it's just so interesting going from a country starved of foreign exchange to now kind of, yeah, it's a fascinating history there.
Yes, it's amazing. And it's amazing, but it makes sense when you see that, people are eager, not only the government, but each individual is eager to learn. Chinese, what I was fascinated when I discovered China in the 80s, Chinese people everywhere were studying something. You know, they were reading books, they were repeating sentences, they were studying all the time. So they have been very eager to learn. And this is something that all Chinese have in common. Sometimes it's a burden on young people, on pupils at school particularly, because they have to study late at night until 10 o'clock and get up very early at 6:30. You know? So yes, and sometimes they are fed up, and many parents dream of sending their children abroad for studying, not only for the consequences in terms of visa and etc. and possibility to live abroad, but also because the burden is not so high as it is on the shoulders of these pure young people.
There's definitely people that can crack under that kind of pressure.
But they love learning. They love learning. There is an actual sincere love for knowledge and science, and this explains a lot. It doesn't explain all, but it explains a lot.
So Francois, let's talk a little bit more about the rationale for developing nuclear energy in China. I mentioned that Taiwan story. That's probably not hugely relevant, but you know, from studying China a little bit and energy in China, what I understand is that, you know, largely most of the electricity is thermal generation from coal, and that coal is mined in the far north of the country, maybe even the northwest, and it has to be like, I think
not only
50-60% of rail traffic is just bringing coal from the north to the populated coastal south. What are the other rationales for the Chinese government pursuing nuclear energy or becoming kind of potentially the country that will be the nuclear energy superpower of the 21st century?
I am not sure if there is any advantage of being a nuclear, nuclear electricity world first supplier. I'm not sure. Being a nuclear power is something, but being just a nuclear electricity supplier is another thing. And I would not bet that it is it's a big thing. It's a big advantage. Going to the moon is probably, yes, it has a significance, a symbolic significance. Being the first in whatever industry, it has also its significance. Being the first in producing cars or in producing solar power, it's also meaningful. Yes, but it's not. I mean, it's not a goal by itself. Chinese are not looking for being the first in nuclear production.
But what's the rationale just for developing nuclear in general?
I think it is still the extremely strong demand in electricity. The Chinese average consumption per capita per year is nearly 5,000, a little less than 5,000 kilowatt hour. when it's 11 and something thousand in US.
Wow.
It's 7,000 in France, and same in UK.
Do you know what it used to be in China, like in the 80s or 90s?
In the 80s or 90s, it was below 2,000.
Yeah. Okay.
It was on 1,500 at that time, maybe. And so now it's nearly 5,000 with of course, a big diversity. I mean, you have poor provinces where the consumption is only 1,800 kilowatt hour per capita per year, where you have provinces around Shanghai or Beijing where it's over 6,800.
Right.
So you have discrepancies, yes, in the country, but in average, in all, it's only 5,000. So some people, sometimes I see that quite often, particularly when I read the Bloomberg news, that the Chinese energy market is oversupplied. And this is a problem. Supposedly, it's to be a problem for nuclear. This is wrong. The Chinese market is undersupply. There is not enough electricity. All the more that now, with the plan of having a zero carbon or less carbon, let's say, less carbon economy by 2050, one important point to get that is to increase the electricity share in the economy.
So electrify everything, right? That's the
yes,
mantra,
electricity for everything, including for cars, etc. Yes. So this is a strong drive to increase whatever source of power. So including, I may disappoint you, but including for coal.
Yeah.
To also here, we must be honest, coal has provided the reason for development in China, as the same in UK in the 19th century.
Sure, yeah.
When you look at the coal use in UK, you see it's strictly parallel to the development. And when you compare, for instance, what's the difference between UK and Italy in the 19th century? It's one is developing coal, the other not. And Italy starts rising when it starts using coal. Yeah. So it was the same for China. And I know that in the West, we say, oh, coal is the devil and we should get rid of it. But the plan, for instance, right now in 2020, the plan between now and 2030 is to increase the coal capacity by as much as new nuclear capacity.
Wow.
In China. So nuclear is growing, it's a good thing, but we should not forget that coal is also growing.
Yeah, and you depressed me with something else when we were having an initial conversation earlier, and that was that with and this was about energy consumption, you were saying that the projected increase in energy consumption just for, I think, 5G infrastructure or internet infrastructure would consume, I'm not sure, all of the current output of China's nuclear.
Yes, all of the current, just the data centers and the data centers, management of these 5G things it requires as much electricity as what nuclear produces today.
And that's about 40 gigawatts, is it?
In terms of no, it's in fact it's in terawatt hours a year, and it's nearly 300 terawatt hour.
And this, I mean, that's a growing area. Data centers. I'm a big fan of Mark P. Mills' work on this, but he talks about sort of predicting future energy requirements. And he says, listen, for food, it's pretty simple. The difference between a starvation diet and a gluttonous diet is, 2,000 calories maybe. And for objects and goods, I mean, people are always finding new gadgets and toys they want, but that's somewhat predictable. But for information processing, the sky's kind of the limit, especially with quantum computing and artificial intelligence and neural networks that are not just performing a calculation and stopping, but constantly running calculations. It's kind of mind-boggling. And I mean, it allows us to crack, for instance, the genome of the COVID or the coronavirus in, a matter of a few days. But yes, it requires an enormous amount of energy.
Yes, to come back to one of your previous question, but young people, for instance, in China now, they are young engineers, graduated people in physics, in mathematics, whatever, in sciences. They are all dreaming. Yes, it is true. They are probably more dreaming in working in Alibaba or 5G related company somehow than working in a nuclear. But one doesn't go without the other.
Yes.
So people are forgetting that what they are developing now, even if it looks purely non-physical, but it requires a lot of material things. Yes.
So let's get back to my sort of original thesis of, my hope that, in some way China, and it's naive, I totally get this, that China is on track. They've experimented, they've picked a lot of different designs, but they've started to kind of create an indigenous design for domestic use, but also for export, the Hualong 1, that maybe, I always think of nuclear in this fashion, right? So if we're thinking about decarbonization, for instance, nuclear is like an enormous freight train, right? And it takes a while to build that train. You need a big engine on it, and it takes a while for that train to start moving down the track and building momentum, right? And that usually requires a lot of government support and shepherding and coordination. And something like a solar panel or a wind turbine is like a bicycle, right? And you can get it going really fast. It doesn't go super fast. The rider needs to take a break every once in a while. Once the train's moving, it's displacing enormous amounts of carbon. Its kind of payload is enormous compared to what you can fit in the bicycle basket on the front of the bike.
Yes.
But it requires all of the shepherding, and it requires a state to really get behind it and organize it. And so that happened in France under Messmer, and for the 70s, and you were very familiar with that as a French engineer. Is China, and I mean that was for a certain set of reasons. I mean, in France, on n'a pas de pétrole, mais on a des idées. We don't have oil, but we have ideas. China, obviously, they have a lot of fossil. They have coal. I guess there's some new gas fields coming online. But how naive am I guess, in hoping perhaps that China's about to sort of have a really big nuclear renaissance, shall we call it, and significantly displace fossil with nuclear in the way that France did under the Messmer plan?
Yes, the decision being centralized somehow it helps, but not because one guy decides for everyone. Mm-hmm. It's because economically, only from the economic point of view, nuclear is profitable in China for the nuclear companies, and they make a lot of money, billions of money. CGN or CNNC are very profitable. Then usually they make not only nuclear electricity, but other things, but still the nuclear part is profitable, even at the feed-in tariff that is fixed by the government. They are profitable. They are selling, by the way, a big share, an increasing share of their production, up to 30%, 40% in some regions. They are selling this production on the free market somehow, not under the tariff fixed by the government. So they are, in fact, they sell it at a lower price, and they still make money. The main reason for that is what is the support they get from the government, but not in the sense you may imagine, but in another sense, in the sense that they have a low rate loan from the banks. And this is the key.
Yes, okay.
The interest rate is what makes or doesn't make nuclear expensive. And if the interest rate is low enough, because the financial cost is enormous in the big infrastructure, and the Chinese are used to that because what they did in the past, be it roads, airports, railways, it is always, it has been till today, enormous infrastructure, which are very costly by themselves.
Big capital costs,
Look at the Berlin airport, which was by several billion euro over budget and by 15 years delayed. an airport. So this does not happen in China.
Mm-hmm.
For the airport also, it doesn't happen. I mean, they build airport very, very fast. So nuclear is just on the same way. There is nothing specific. There is no specific. It's just a state which, by the means of loans and low interest rate, is providing development. Yes, is guaranteeing development.
Yeah, I was talking.
Chinese companies, for instance, Chinese companies in Africa, I have been working for them, so I know that Chinese companies in Africa who build roads or dams, they have a profit rate which is around 2%, extremely low.
Mm-hmm.
But they still make money. Sometimes they miss the target and they don't make money, lose money. It happens too. But I mean, they are not very. They are ready to sacrifice, in fact, their profit, their revenue, for the sake of long-term success. And it's true at the company's level, not only at the governmental decision level.
Mm-hmm. So that's very interesting because, I had David Watson on talking about nuclear in the UK, particularly Hinkley Point, and how, I think interest rate is about 9% on that project.
Yes.
And I think more than half of the final cost is going to be the cost of capital. So that's a big difference. But also, so the other thing that comes up a lot in the West is, with liberalized electricity markets, nuclear tends to not be favored well. I think because of, providing this secure base load, what's lucrative is, bid-in prices for peak demand and things like that. Is that structured differently in China in a way that's more favorable to nuclear?
Yes, because the demand is high. Yes,
right.
Because the demand is high. But the problem you are mentioning of the peak supply by wind and solar, this problem is reaching China also. Mm-hmm. It is not entirely visible. Why? Because the provinces which are rich in wind and solar are the Xinjiang, the Gansu, Inner Mongolia, Yunnan somehow, underdeveloped regions. And these regions are not yet able to use first 100% of the electricity they produce, because their level of development is very low compared to the eastern part. Mm-hmm. And second, they cannot physically export these energies, because there are more and more now high voltage transmission, but they are still very costly, and it puts the cost of solar power produced in Inner Mongolia, for instance, for the eastern coast would be twice the price of the local nuclear kilowatt hour. So
it reminds me a little bit of, this idea of like transporting coal from the far north to the southern coast, and transporting electrons from wind and solar from the north or the far west is, like you're saying, a big
that from 2009
railways or DC or transmission lines.
From 2009 to 2010, China started to import coal. Mm-hmm. Can you believe that?
Wow.
Why did they import coal? Yes, because if you say China imports coal, it doesn't make sense. They are themselves having so much coal. But if you look at China, south of China and north of China, then there the situation is different. Mm-hmm. And it happens that the coal supplied to southern China coming from Indonesia was cheaper locally than the coal coming from the north.
Like, what's the distance that they're shipping that coal by freight train from the north to the southern coast? Is that 1,000 kilometers, 2,000? Like, I'm trying to put that into perspective.
Yes, it's 2,000 kilometers roughly, depending on the region. But in fact, because
that's kind of
question.
Yeah,
it's not only a question of kilometers.
Halfway across the United States. I think the U.S. is like 5,000 kilometers wide.
Yes, and it's not only a question of kilometers. It's what you mentioned. The railways are full with this. With many trains, in fact, and including the coal transportation. But so it makes they have to buy in advance the transport, and the pressure on transport makes it high price and not very manageable. It's less manageable for Guangdong province than buying coal from Indonesia.
I mean, it almost seems like we're discussing, like a federal state, but I mean, a number of different countries. We talked about this before. Each province is so populous, and the characteristics are so different that the southeast is its own country. It's quite nuclear powered. You're saying 25-30%, and in the future, that's probably going to increase to a very large percentage of the electricity in these areas. Whereas the north will stay with more coal because they can burn it locally, and there's less of a pressure to build there,
Yes.
perhaps. So in terms of other rationales, I mean, Beijing was famous for its air pollution. I think there was a huge shutdown of industries, and in terms of permits for driving a car in the city during the Summer Olympics, I think 2010 maybe. That was a huge issue for the athletes and in general. How much is air pollution driving the adoption of nuclear energy in China?
Yes, it serves as an argument or an excuse, depending in which side you are, but for building nuclear, but not only for building all what is non-coal energy, including dams and solar plants, and you have, in wind farms, for instance, you have huge projects of 20 billion US dollars project currently under construction for a wind farm.
Wow.
Yes. So it's it's. I mean, they are in need of everything. So this is the real drive. Now, regarding the pollution, yes, I've been living in China all this time, and I saw myself the pollution rising from, you're right, 2007 to 2015, I would say. The pollution was only increasing in Beijing city. I remember having been in northern China, and you couldn't see, because of the smoke, you couldn't see further than 100 meters. But this has changed. After 2015, it started to change. The peak was probably 2015. So the peak has nothing to do, and the fact that we decreased from this peak has nothing to do with nuclear power. The fight against pollution started much earlier. Apart from this, the nuclear contribution to it. But it is used as an excuse. Look, the pollution is non-bearable. You should not stand that. So please support nuclear. Yes, it plays a role. But the fight against pollution was done with the closure of many factories, steel, cement, all these kind of factories were displaced from around the big cities, and they were displaced in more remote locations, and this helped to relieve the
urban
cities. The urban areas.
So let's and I'm guessing that the way you're painting this is yes, air pollution is a consideration, but it's not a primary driver. And I'm guessing that climate change is also an excuse for nuclear, or a selling point, but it's not a primary driver for the adoption of nuclear in the way that, say, climate change is a driver for wind and solar in the US or in Europe.
Yes.
So the primary driver is still just the quality of nuclear in terms of providing electricity at a decent price point that's reliable. Is that what's driving it, more or less?
I think so, yes. In fact, you're right, pollution played a role. Climate change is a selling point. The best proof for that is that Mr. President Xi Jinping talked about the 2060. He didn't talk about 2050 goal, but 2060 net zero carbon in China. He started talking about that only last September. While the plan to build 6 to 8 new nuclear reactors per year, this plan came out 3 years earlier and was officially expressed in April 2019 by the Ministry of Environment. So it's much before the climate change issue.
So if we crunch those numbers, I mean, China's currently sitting, I think, around 50 gigawatts of capacity. And, that's the third largest sort of nuclear country in terms of, I think it's the US with about 100 gigawatts, France with 70, China's about 50. How is that going to change, say by 2030 or 2050, if these projections continue, or if the trends continue?
If
Will
the
China be
trends,
the largest nuclear producer soon? Is it going to have more reactors than the rest of the world by 2100? Like what's anticipated here?
yes, I anticipate that by 2030, China will be the first nuclear producer. Yes, in terms of electricity, by 2030 would overpass the US. And for France, in fact, last year, 2020, China produced nearly 370 terawatt hours, while France produced only 335, something like that. So last year, France was behind China. But it is true that France was a little bit at a lower level than in 2019. So the 2019 level is in France was still higher than 2020's level in China.
Right.
But anyhow, next year or within 2 years, China will be the second for sure, and will be the first in 2030, around 2030, and will go on developing. What is amazing, it's not that it will get the first rank in 2030, is that it will go on after that, developing at the same pace. This is the stranger thing, and they may have 200 gigawatt operational, twice what is currently in US by 2040. And it will not stop there.
Yeah.
It will not stop there. It will go up to 300 gigawatt. Maybe not with the same technologies. Definitely they will adopt this. They are now building fast breeders reactors with the help of Russians and so. So the technologies will be different, but the move will be slow. From PWR to fast breeder.
I'm going to be the skeptic. I'm going to be the skeptic here because we've certainly heard that claim at the beginning of the French rollout. For instance, I mean, France was supposed to electrify absolutely everything. Basically, I forget the projection of the number of reactors in the U.S. in the heyday and the build out. There was going to be 1,000 gigawatts of capacity, and all electricity in the States was going to be electric. It would be nuclear. How is it different in China that this isn't just a kind of overzealous projection of the nuclear industry? Or
no, for the reason you mentioned yourself, if you take the Fujian province with this 50 million inhabitants and its 25% of nuclear share in its local mix, then you take the neighboring province. And what do you get? You get again 50 million inhabitants, 60 million inhabitants, and zero nuclear.
Okay.
So for the reason of geography, this growth is trustable.
Yeah.
It's not. You're right. Maybe on the East Coast, maybe nuclear share will not go finally beyond 25% or 30% of the mix. Still, there is a potential. The growth potential at 30% of the mix is still very important and will justify another 100 gigawatt in China. But even when this is obtained, you have all the other provinces that will be somehow like new nuclear countries. And they will want to have their 10% of the share, 12%, 15% in nuclear. And this is another 200 gigawatt.
Yeah. So what's the relevance of the Hualong 1? And particularly, I mean, I guess domestically, is that what's, you said fast breeders are kind of the future into the 2050s probably, but for now anyway, what's the relevance of the Hualong 1 domestically? Is that kind of what's going to be chosen, built out exclusively? Are they going to keep importing other designs like European and American designs? Hopefully some Canadian, or are they going to just stick with the Hualong 1 domestically? And what does it mean for the international market? It's interesting. We've lived in sort of the American century in the 20th century for sure. Everyone looks to the US for leadership and to Europe to some degree for leadership and sort of follows that plan. That's going to change as China rises to be, the largest, sort of the largest economy in the world. But I really do expect that there's going to be a shift in a variety of levels towards, you just the world tends to pivot towards the most powerful country in the world and try and emulate it to some degree. Do you see China's investment in nuclear, the Hualong one, its export markets, being very significant in terms of shifting global energy production, or exporting nuclear to developing countries? What's your predictions there, your forecast?
I don't think that China will energetically rule the world. China is importing more than half of its oil and gas, and this is for many years ahead. It will be the case. But regarding industry, yes, China may try to get a bigger share of the world cake. And
like if they can build stuff on budget and on time, I could see, rather than selecting the EPR for some future site in the UK, that, I mean, again, geopolitics will probably interfere with this a lot, but you could imagine saying, okay, we want to build a nuclear plant, we want to build it on budget and on time. Who does that well? I guess it was the South Koreans for the UAE, but I mean, that may more and more become China as this nuclear freight train gets moving and the supply chain is incredibly well greased, the workforce is well greased. I mean, a lot of infrastructure projects overseas that China does, they just bring in the whole labor force, from what I understand, which frustrates the local population. But yeah,
there are many people, there are many in China, within the nuclear industry. You're right. There are many people advocating the development of the Hualong and the success of selling the success of the Hualong as the main point for exporting Chinese know-how. And they have been saying that already many years, underlying, for instance, the point that selling is what they were saying. Selling one nuclear reactor is equivalent to the sale of 1 million cars. In terms of money, revenue, and in terms of also of working forces that is created in China for such export. But one, you didn't see that many Chinese cars abroad. Since there are many Chinese car manufacturers, we don't know. We usually believe you are only one, Geely and some other BYD, but you have 40 big car manufacturers in China. And you still don't see Chinese cars in Canada or in France. Not many. I have not seen yet Chinese cars in France on the roads. But China can develop its nuclear power without selling, exporting quantities of it. Its local market is enough for supporting the development of the nuclear industry. However, you're right. They are now understanding the importance of being accepted worldwide, and it's why they are working with UK, but not only, with Poland, with Turkey, with even with South Africa, with Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Indonesia, Thailand, Thailand has already some shares in a southern Chinese nuclear power plant, and so they are working on all these countries to try to compete with the Russians. The Russians have today 134 billion US in their orders in a nuclear power equivalent, and China has only two reactors in Pakistan, but so they want to copy. They have been stimulated by the success of Rosatom in the world, and they believe they can do the same. But they know their own weak points or shortcomings, even in this regard. They acknowledge, for instance, that they don't have what you mentioned. They don't have the geopolitical power that Russia has. In some places, like in Kenya, for instance, they are strongly pushing for a nuclear reactor in Kenya. And yes, there they may have, because of their global presence in Africa. But in other countries, it's more difficult. Yes, probably it's more difficult than Russia, than for Russian who are well established in Egypt and in Turkey and so. So they know that they have to work on that. They have to make working together the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Industry. Mm-hmm. Which is, the ministries don't work well together in China. So right. Here they have to join. They have to join, and it's a difficult task. And also they know that they have to enrich their offer, not only in building a Hualong, for instance, which they are proposing, for instance, now in Uzbekistan, but they have also to propose a whole range of services, including the fuel supply and the fuel reprocessing after it has been used locally. It means taking it back to China. It means transport. It means safety, security. It means a plant for reprocessing or a place to store it. So it's a complex issue. It's not only I sell my Hualong for 10 pounds less than the EPR per megawatt hour in UK. Yeah, it's not that easy. What do you do with how do you fuel for developed nuclear countries like UK? It's easy, but for all the other countries, it's not the same. Right. So they are working on that. It's why the development of Hualong is very satisfactory. They have 12 plants under construction, 12 Hualong. Currently, they plan 12 others in the near future, in the coming 3 years. So yes, it has a nice future in China. They have some objectives and possibilities in other countries, but it's not as easy as it looks like.
And what does it look like for, say they build 12 Hualongs, I think we know from nuclear economics typically that you keep building the same thing, you keep building the supply chain, the workforce, the expertise, the cost continues to come down. Economics is not my strong point, but in terms of a cost per megawatt hour, can we compare the Hualong to what's being built in terms of like the EPR or the AP1000? And
yes,
then what do you expect for that price curve to be like for the Hualong, for instance? Is that going to come down significantly in 10 years after they've built another like 30 of these things, or?
In fact, what surprised me, we don't have yet the price per kilowatt hour or megawatt hour, because the first Hualong in Fuxing across the Taiwan Strait has been operating commercially only in January this year. Right. In 2021, so we don't have the experience enough to check. But what we have is the construction cost. So right. the cost per kilowatt or per
for this first of a kind build.
Yes. Yeah. But and strangely for some miners, not for me, but strangely, yes, this cost is not as low as it could have been expected. It's only 7% cheaper than the Westinghouse AP1000.
Built in China, right? Because built in Georgia, that's a very different cost. Okay.
Yes, per megawatt, per capacity.
What is that number per megawatt hour?
It's around $3,000 US. Okay. I forgot the exact figure, but it's I can tell you exactly. But okay. It's yes. It's they are not as cheap as they could be, as we expected them to be. This Hualong.
And is that because of first of a kind considerations, or is that are they going to get a lot cheaper, or you expect that they're not going to be a big breakthrough in terms of being cheaper?
I have, for instance, here the price in yuan. I didn't translate it in US dollars, but you have 15,600 for the Hualong, and 18,300 for the AP1000, and 16,800 for the EPR. Okay. So the difference is not that big.
Right.
And then again, it's the construction cost, because for the operating cost, the higher cost for EPR will go down because you have 1,600 megawatt for the EPR and 1,200 megawatt only for the same infrastructure.
Right.
I mean, for one big spot of infrastructure, you have a bigger output.
Right.
So
there's economy of scale.
Yeah, so you will have automatically an economy of the scale. So the 18% more expensive EPR might become same price in terms of kilowatt hour in the coming years.
Interesting.
So it's not as cheap as we would like it. And also, don't misunderstand the Chinese advantage. We have been used in the West to buy toys for children because they were cheaper, made in China,
right.
and they were of a much less good quality. But it's not the case in the industry, particularly with the nuclear industry, and also for the big construction industry. Don't believe that a dam made by Chinese in Congo is half the price of the same dam made by the French. No, it is nearly as expensive. Mm-hmm. So the advantage of Chinese for these developing countries or for themselves is the same inside China. It's not that they are low price. This is an outdated view. They are guaranteeing the construction, particularly the construction time. Mm-hmm. I have myself participated to the construction of a highway by Chinese companies in Africa. I organized, it was before joining the WNA. I was working on big project infrastructure for a while. And I was representing Chinese. We Chinese were more expensive than US, Turkey, Italy, and less expensive than Japan, less expensive than French in international tenders. Yeah. But what we could guarantee is the construction in time. Why? Is that because we were sending thousands of workers working day and night? No, because we were able to mobilize a lot of equipment at the same time. Right. All along the infrastructure, which meant what? Which meant day one, we could use 100 million or 150 million US dollars. Mm-hmm. And nobody else could do it.
Right, okay.
So the quantity of available equipment on site was convincing from the Chinese point of view to guarantee right. the construction on time at the end of the end.
And with nuclear, that's obviously
the key for construction success by China in foreign countries and in China as well at the end of the end is money. Mm-hmm.
And with nuclear, with that cost of capital, if you finish on time or early, that's yes. a huge implication on the price. Yes. We have a little bit of time left, and I'm gonna try and pick your brain a little bit more. But in terms of advanced nuclear and small modular reactors, this is a question I've had. You know, countries with really healthy nuclear industries like Russia and China, it's, you know, in the West, I think we've become maybe much more humble, or in some ways have a lot of hubris in terms of, you know, okay, our nuclear industries are in total atrophy, but we're going to go and do this super advanced stuff, or we're going to experiment with an economy of multiples with SMRs and see if we can get you're talking about how the EPR may be cheaper than the Hualong because it's just a bigger reactor and economies of scale. But in the West, it's sort of like, we're going to tear that all up and try building lots of really small reactors. And maybe that's the future and this revolution in price. My contention has always been, listen, I mean, let's look at what the really healthy nuclear industries are doing, like Russia and China. I mean, surely if this were true, these countries would be wise to it and they'd be banging out, you know, SMRs like sausages in factories. You know, because if this is just such an evident, you know, if this is such an evident thing or self-evident thing, why would they not be doing it? And I mean, there's obviously a bunch of other factors I might not be considering. Just China's a big country; it has big demand, it needs big reactors, maybe. But what's going on in terms of, I guess, particularly small modular reactors? Is that something that China's pursuing, not just for sort of remote military base applications like Russia's doing with, the far north, for instance. But is that something is there going to be an SMR revolution in China where they're going to all of a sudden be building lots of really small reactors and putting them all over the place?
Yes, thank you for this very interesting question. In fact, China is developing SMR. Yes, all companies, CNNC, CGN, SPIC, they have all their designs of several designs. Each of these companies has several designs of SMR. 100 megawatt, 150 megawatt, 200 megawatts, up to 400 megawatt for one of the speaker project. So they all have these projects. They have also projects for kind of small modular reactor, which are in fact heating reactors for northern China to replace all the heating systems. But even if you look only at electricity, there are several reasons behind the development or the interest into SMR in the world and in China as well. First, it enables to cut into pieces this initial capital. Yeah. So it seems that the main advantage of SMR is to decrease the impact, the burden of the initial capital. And we come back to the example I told you about the dams or highways in Africa for China. So this is not a very big issue today in China, but in the world it is an issue. It is why SMR may have a future beyond what you mentioned, remote mining sites in Canada or remote communities, in the north, in Alaska or elsewhere. Yes, SMR may help in that regard. They are also changing the face of safety, nuclear safety, because SMR are reducing by themselves and by their inner capabilities the emergency zone. This is the main thing, because you know that Fukushima's big problem was the evacuation of the people. Not the radiation, but the evacuation. And the evacuation, the decided evacuation was a consequence of what was considered as the emergency zone at the first. So if emergency zone is decreased from 5 kilometers to 500 meters, yes, it may have an impact as how people can accept an SMR not too far from cities.
So, but within China, is this like? Do you think there's an economic rationale? Do you think there's a big shift that's about to happen in the Chinese nuclear industry, where they're going to say, you know what, forget these big projects, these big designs, let's go, or not even forget, but let's create a parallel path where we're doing lots and lots of SMRs, or will SMRs be fringe in China?
But you see, you say yourself, the advantage of SMR is that if there are many. If you have not many SMRs at once, then it loses its advantage. So
and China, I think there's an open question about, like, so if it's an economy of scale versus economy of multiples, how many multiples do you need until they equal out economically? And that might be 10 SMRs, it might be 20, until your supply chain is going and your factory's going. I mean, what are your thoughts?
It has been calculated by one of my colleagues from Cambridge University, and it depends on the capacity of the SMR. If it's 100 megawatt or 200 megawatt, it makes a big change. And you may have this kind of break-even for 200 megawatt might be 25 units, but for 100 megawatt it would be 150 units. So it's yes, the evaluation of the economic efficiency of SMR is very difficult to decide today. But China is not only considering SMR, but is building an SMR. In fact, China, even though China has the same goal, as you mentioned, the one for supplying some military zone somewhere, they might also have that in mind. But they are anyway building right now, starting end of last year, an SCP-100 by CNNC in the southern province of Hainan, in the island of Hainan. So there is an SMR under construction. And everybody expects a new scale in USA to have the first SMR in the world in 2028, something like that. And that will be 3 or 4 years after China.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting.
China will have its SMR working, and it's SMR in the sense that in our sense, it's a compact things with the steam generator included in the containment, and so yes, so it's a true SMR, and it's already under construction.
Yeah, I guess so much I want to talk about with you, and maybe we'll have to have you back for a second show here. You're a real wealth of knowledge on a country that has, it's when I was researching for the show, there's not much available. There's World Nuclear Association articles, Wikipedia. I didn't find any podcasts or not much YouTube materials. So it's a real pleasure having you. But getting back to kind of attitudes towards nuclear energy in China, in the US and Europe, it's really become a culture wars issue, between sort of a green left environmental side and maybe some folks, are very anti-nuclear, and some folks in the right wing that are pro-nuclear, but there's this tension where the pro-nuclear people are free market fundamentalists, and therefore not, even though they might be okay with it, there's no mechanism for them to actually deploy it. And the left just hates it. In China, you're saying there's just more of a acceptance and a enthusiasm about technology, but there are anti-nuclear people and maybe a movement in China. Very interesting. When I read this book by Yuzi Qing, she was talking about really like one of the first large protest movements in Hong Kong had to do with shortly after the Chernobyl disaster. I think it was in protest against this first real mechanism to get foreign exchange to build that nuclear plant right next to Hong Kong. And this was, hundreds of thousands of people in the street, teachers unions, all kinds of unions. So there's a history, I think a lot of people, again, assume Chinese martial law, the state doesn't care at all what the people think. Doesn't matter if they don't want the nuclear plant built there, it's going to happen anyway. And it's a very simplistic, I think, understanding. But tell us a little bit about, I guess in closing, a little bit about attitudes to nuclear, but particularly that kind of anti-nuclear sentiment. Is that a threat at all in some ways, or how significant is it in terms of delaying projects or canceling projects? Do you think it's likely to arise in the future, to be a bigger issue? What's your sense?
It happened already. In fact, you have many protests of all kinds in China on many topics, and a lot of them related to environmental questions. You have maybe 200,000 protests a year across China, for all reasons. So don't think that China is a country free of protest, public protest. No, it happens. It happened also for nuclear projects. It happens in 2014, first for a project in the Guangdong province, which was not a nuclear plant, but which was a nuclear park, an industrial park supposed to manufacture fuel for the plants, and it was supposedly, expectedly, 50% CGN, CNNNC park.
These, for the people who don't know the acronyms, these are the two sort of competing nuclear companies in China, right? Because there's not just one.
Yes, there are nuclear companies in China.
It would be like if there was a Framatome and then a competing one. Yes, and they don't really get along.
They are the two big companies in China. Yeah. Yes, and they made an agreement which was very difficult for them because it was a 50%, not 49-51, but 50-50. It's psychologically very complicated in China to get such agreement, and but between Chinese and foreigners there is no problem. Chinese want 51, but between themselves so it was a fight, and then finally they agreed, but there was a protest in the street for only 1.5 days, and then the project was cancelled.
How big was the protest? How many people?
The project, we don't know how many people were in the streets, but we've seen pictures and there were maybe hundreds of people, not thousands, hundreds of people, yes. Okay. And the same happened in August 2016 in northeast part, not near Shandong province, above Shanghai, halfway between Shanghai and Beijing. And there was a protest also against in a place where they were operating two reactors, where now it's a little bit later, there are 4 reactors operating and there are 2 reactors under construction. Mm-hmm. And in this very place, there was a plan to build a reprocessing plant with the French Orano. and people protested in the street for one day, and the project was cancelled. So I myself have some doubts about the sincerity or the honesty of this of this protest. Were there a kind of manipulation to cancel the project? Might be possible.
So you're saying the kind of powers that be use the protest as an excuse to cancel the project, not that the
yes,
protest
it doesn't mean that the protests were not true.
Right.
But yes, they were a little bit too easily followed,
right, like a half-day protest shutting down a
yes,
multi-billion-dollar project. Okay,
yeah. So I have some doubt about this, but more generally, yes, there is. When Fukushima happened in China, all the shelves in the southern China, all the shelves in the shops went empty. Particularly the salt. You could not find salt because salt is supposed to have
iodine.
Iodine, yes.
Yeah. And there's probably some salt poisonings that happened afterwards.
Yes, but they were empty only for a week.
Yeah.
And then people calmed down somehow, and they got more confident about the news that were said on the TV. Anyhow, there is a kind of sensitivity, yes, to this question. Of course, they are following what happened in Fukushima. Last week, there were several articles in Chinese in China about post-Fukushima consequences in Japan, and but always with the conclusion that Japan cannot do without nuclear.
And sorry, so in the press, like throughout Europe, the United States, Canada, like our national broadcaster claimed that the earthquake caused the nuclear accident and that the nuclear accident caused 20,000 deaths.
Yes.
So it's not, I'm guessing it wasn't reported like that in China.
No, it was not. They make the difference because first, for the reason that they first suffered and are still sometimes suffering of earthquake by themselves.
Yeah.
No, you have the huge earthquake in 2006 in Sichuan province, which killed, 15,000 people. So it's maybe 7,000, forgot the exact number. But it was a big catastrophe in China. So I mean, they are used to the and also floods happened in China along the rivers, and it's also considered as a
hazard. Yeah.
Hazard and misery, and so they cannot make the confusion. Yes, they do separate the two things. All Asia has experienced enough earthquakes to make the difference between earthquake and nuclear disaster. But would they believe, for instance, the South Korean? You remember in 2017 they made this movie which was named Pandora's Promise. Pandora's Promise is a documentary.
It's the pro-nuclear.
Yes, and they made a kind of they took the same name, and the movie was named Pandora, and it was telling the story of one young worker in a nuclear plant with his family and following a disaster, Fukushima-like disaster.
Right.
So it was seen by 2 million people in South Korea, and it had a big impact on the polls who decided for the coming elections. And it's why the currently president of South Korea, he promised that if he would be elected, then he would stop nuclear construction.
Wow.
And so this played a big role in South Korea. Can the same thing happen in China? Today, according to me, no, it cannot, because you have very simple people, not educated people. They are taking advantage of these constructions. They are supporting construction. They are supporting development. And you have educated people and who are as you said, enthusiastic about new technologies. Don't forget that we have forgotten in the West that the nuclear reaction itself is a kind of wonder of nature. And the fact that we can get energy out of it is the second wonder. But this first wonder, that the radioactivity, is at the root of, it's the very root of life on Earth. probably without radioactivity, we would not have any life on Earth, because the atmosphere would not be protected from the outside radiations, and so for many reasons. And because it's the nuclear reaction within the center of the Earth that make moving the core of the Earth, and this movement enables the field, the magnetic field. This magnetic field is entertained by the movement of the moon also, and all this together makes life possible on Earth. It is also possible that radioactivity played a role somehow 3 billion years ago, 2.5 billion years ago, for the first split of the first multicellular organism. Wow. So there are many reasons to believe that the radioactivity plays somehow a role in our current life. So there is a wonder hidden in radioactivity. It's something hidden. It is true. We don't see radioactivity. We don't see radiation. It's why we fear them. We are afraid of them. But sometimes in something that we don't see, there is something hidden. And this hidden thing is not maybe threatening us. On the contrary, is one of the secrecy and one of the secrets of life and the world. And I think that Chinese are mentally more open to that. They are more open to, for instance, look at what they did for the COVID-19. What they did, they tried everything, because with humility, they know that we cannot decide what is absolutely right and all the rest is absolutely wrong. There is only the vaccination and all the rest is wrong. Chinese believe that we don't know. Maybe giving some vitamin D, maybe giving sometimes some traditional medicine help, maybe sometimes something else. So they try everything. And they try everything with humility. And they have the same attitude towards many things, including the wonders of nature. I'm sure that this also, even though it's never said by no one, but it plays a role in the mentality towards this energy.
Okay, Francois, we could talk all day. It's been a real pleasure having you on. Thank you for making the time to come on Decouple, and we will have you back. I can promise you that.
My pleasure.
Okay.
My pleasure.
If you enjoyed the podcast, please make sure to subscribe, like, and review us on your podcast platform of choice. Until next time, guys.